Okay, Hebrews. Let's see. Okay, I'll try to cut it short. I was going to do the entire book of Hebrews because you can see that there's the outline and it's all done there, but there's just too much there. As some people would say, your sermons are just too much. I don't know if they're saying they're too long or there's just too much material, but I'll just kind of leave it at that. We'll try to make it short for this quick intro. Names are absolutely vital in God's world, in the scriptures. Names, they give us incredible insights to what God is saying. They help open up the text, people's names, when you understand what the names mean. As a matter of fact, I never did this before, and you may be able to find a couple that I've missed, but God told 3 times the parents, this is the name you're going to call your son. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it was Isaac, Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. Isaac means he laughed. Now, I've never thought about this, right? But when God told Abraham, you're going to have a son with Sarah, he laughed. And then God said, and you're going to name that son Isaac, which means he laughed. And then was it months later or a year later, he says to Sarah, you're going to have a son. And he said it to Abraham again. And Sarah was in the back hiding, or just outside, probably because they were living in tents, heard, and she laughed. And then God called her in and he said, why did you laugh? And she goes, I didn't laugh, right? Well, he said, yes, you did. They both laughed because their faith wouldn't accept the fact that God's going to give them a child. And then he gave them a child. And for the rest of their life, Isaac, they're always reminded of their lack of faith in that period of time, right? And so if God can do that, he gave you this son, so your faith is going to grow. Every time you say Isaac, you're reminded about your, I didn't accept this fact, but it did come true. So that was brilliant. And then he told who? Zacharias, you're going to have a child. And guess what? His name's going to be John. Jehovah has been gracious. I am being gracious to you and Elizabeth because you guys are so faithful. And then Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, to Joseph, Gabriel says, yeah, you guys are going to have a child and you're going to call him Jesus. Now, I always said Jesus means salvation, but it's more so. Jehovah is salvation. And there is no other name under heaven by which we can be saved. Jehovah is salvation. Jesus is salvation. Jesus is Jehovah. Jesus is God. You got to accept that. So names right there. God's saying you need to call your child this. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't until Zacharias said, when they said, what's the name of your son? Because he was silent, he was mute until John was born. And when they asked him, what's the name of your son? He said, that first word he said, John. First words that come out of his mouth. Amazing. That's how important names are. And as a matter of fact, names are so important that God changes people's names, right? Abram, exalted father. No. Abraham, father of the multitude. Sarai, which means dominant, which is a really, you need to think that one through. She's dominant. To Sarah, princess. Jacob, supplanter. Now this is kind of interesting. Supplanter. Now, that name always messes me up. But I was thinking about it last night, and supplanter to me is kind of like in the shadow, right? He's in the shadow of his big brother, and then finally one day, boom, he's up there, or boom, he's up there. So supplanter always, to me, is always kind of in the back. And then he says, no, you're going to be called Israel because you've quit being in the shadows, and now you've wrestled with God. He who wrestles with God. Saul the word, his name means demanding. And Saul was running around demanding. And then finally he became a Christian. And then he turned his name from Saul into Paul, which means little, which means he learned to humble himself, which is what all Christians need to do. Simon hearing to Peter, because Peter wasn't one who listens to God. He's got little rocks in his head. His ears are plugged up. And he needs to open up his ears, like we need to open up our ears, which we see in this incredible book of Hebrews. And then Joseph, may God add, to Barnabas, son of encouragement. And that's what Barnabas was. He helped develop John Mark, incredibly so that he was of great value to Paul. Names mean something, you know. And I also sent out the 3 genealogies of Genesis. All those names mean something, and it makes a perfect sentence. And it helps, to me, the 3 genealogies of Genesis helps prove the inspiration of scriptures. There is absolutely no way that Moses could have written those names down. And it's God speaking what? Through history, because God's helping these guys get named. And when you've got 3 genealogies and they all make total sense, when you look at the translation of the names, you go, whoever could come up with that? Well, the only one that could ever come up with that is God. And that's what we need to understand. Inspiration, right? And then I forgot to add the Gospel of Ruth. And if you don't understand what that means, go study all the names in Ruth, right? It totally gives depth and insight to what's going on. Not just, you know, it gives deeper insight. Names are so important for that. As a matter of fact, your new name is absolutely vital. Like your parents named you something. Some people live up their names, some people don't. But what our parents called us is, you know, it's neither here nor there. These are biblical names that we're talking about because they were named by God. But your new name from God is Christian, which means anointed one. And do you live up to it? Because Christ, we know, means anointed, and Christ is prophet, priest, and king. You anoint those 3 offices. And if you're a Christian, that means you're an ambassador to Christ, you're a priest for Christ, and you belong to royal family, right? You belong to royalty. So when you remember who you are as a Christian, then you need to act. That name's very important. So if you want to memorize the 13 names, right? Because what Jeff took was the marching orders. I also put in the notes, which is simply the camp of the Jews, the throne room of Christ, and then the New Jerusalem, which happens after Judgment Day. If you look at the 3, they fit on top of each other. It's really brilliant. Like the camp of the saints is the physical, the throne room is the spiritual, and then the eternal, which is where we're headed for, is that new heavenly Jerusalem. But they all look the same, and you just see those changes, right? So in the camp, when the people had to move, you know, you can just, I may not even get into Hebrews. I'll keep an eye on the time, so because like it'll be 12 before I even get into it. But the camp of the Jews is so intricate, so brilliant. Because you got to remember, God takes these guys, these slaves, who don't know very much. They're not well educated, right? They're bricklayers and brick makers, like, and he brings out 2.5 million people into a wilderness and then says, oh, by the way, this is how we're going to set up tabernacle, dead center, priesthood all the way around. And then here's the tribes, 3 in the south, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, 3, no, that's 3 on the east, 3 on the, I can never figure it out. I think it's 3 on the south is Reuben, Simeon, Gad. On the north, it's, no, that's on the west. Don't worry about it. Those directions is Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And then coming down, it's Dan, Asher, Naphtali. Now, when you guys leave, Judah goes first, Issachar second, Zebulun third, Reuben, Simeon, and then Gad. And then I want the Aaronic priesthood, and then Kohath, who's carrying all the utensils in the tabernacle, and then Merari, who's got I think it's got the canvases, and then Gershon's got the poles, or vice versa. They're right in the middle. And then I want Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Naphtali. This is the pattern that you've got to, when you move, you're moving 2.5 million people. And then don't forget that he's got, for streetlights, he's got that fire at night. Now think about that. You've got a camp of 2.5 million people, and you've got enough light by God, who is the flame. And you're enemies of Israel, or you're just wondering, who are these people cutting through my property? But you go there at night and you look and you go, whoa, we're staying away from those guys, because that fire in the sky just lights it up. We have streetlights to give us protection from the darkness, right? These guys, man, for 40 years. And then they had the cloud during the day. Like, God so took care of them, let alone food and water, right? Like, that is an absolute incredible miracle. And yet they all still perish in the wilderness. Why? Because they didn't. Miracles don't save people. It's your faith that saves people, right? So if you take the marching order by who leaves first, and that comes out of Numbers chapter 2, apply it to Hebrews, you'll see that it gives greater insight to what the Hebrew author is saying in each of the 13 chapters. Oh, one other one I wanted to point out was Hebrews chapter 7, which is really brilliant. He says in verse 2, to whom also Abraham apportioned 1/10 of all the spoils, speaking of Melchizedek, was first of all by the translation of his name. So here's God telling us, you really want to understand Melchizedek? Understand his name. King of righteousness, and then King of Salem, which is King of peace. Melchizedek, I think it's the Zedek is the king, or vice versa, right? But that's what Melchizedek means, King of righteousness. And we know he came out of Salem, which is peace. But God's showing us right in the text that this is a way to get deeper understanding of who Melchizedek is. And when you see all the names that we've mentioned, you get a deeper understanding. Okay, chapter 1. Who is it? It's Judah. Judah's the first one to go. That's from who Jesus comes down through, the tribe of Judah. And Judah is really brilliant because object of praise. That's what his name means. And when his mom named him, she was saying, Jehovah is to be praised, because he gave her her fourth son, which is Judah. And look at how this thing starts, right? God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, many portions, many ways, in the last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. Oh, wow. Speaking of names, he's inherited a much more excellent name than they. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son? Today I've begotten you. Jesus is the Son of God. As a matter of fact, he is God, because if you drop down to verse 8, but of the Son, he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. He's making a perfect statement there. Who's Christ? He's God. Who do we need to praise? Christ. Absolutely. So I should have said at the beginning, the Hebrews is the Jews in Palestine in about 60 AD, when the Jews were persecuting the church. And they're really struggling to whether, should we go back to Judaism? Should we remain a Christian? They're really hurting at this period in time. And here he's coming across with this because he's trying to say, look, get into the spiritual. understand who you are, understand who you really need to worship. And right off the bat in chapter 1, who is it? It's Christ, right? Absolutely. Let's just get down to it. And what I find is interesting is John chapter 20, verse 17. I mean, we once in a while mention this text. John chapter 20, verse 17. That doesn't sound like it. No, it's probably verse 26. Yeah, chapter 20, verse 26. After 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas was with them. And the doors having been shut, and Jesus stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Hey, reach here with your finger. See my hands? And reach in here with your sight into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but be believing." Like, I'm sorry. Those guys got to be pretty brave or gruesome. I don't know. Like, he's saying, put your fingers in my wound. Put your finger right here in the hole in the side of my body. And when Thomas does that, what does he say? "My Lord, my God." That is an absolutely incredible statement, right? Like, that is just, that's that moment when you finally understand who Christ is and what he means to you. And you can never lose sight of that moment that he is my Lord, which means my master and my God. And Jesus says, "Because you have seen me, you believe. Blessed are they who do not see, yet they believe." That's us. Many other signs Jesus performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in it, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you can have what? You have life in his name. Who is Jesus? He is the object of praise. And he so opened up the eyes of Thomas right here. And it's kind of like John 3:5. I was thinking, you have to be begotten from above. How? By water and the Spirit, or you can't enter the kingdom. And the water is the word of God. And the Spirit, it's the Holy Spirit. There's that moment of conviction that you understand. It's Matthew 16:16, where Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, who do you think I am?" "Well, I know you're the Son of the living God." We made that statement. Do we hang on to that statement? Right? The rest of the world has their own beliefs. Is he the object of our praise? And do we take ourselves back to Thomas, my Lord, my God? And when we do that, okay, so what kind of a life am I living? And if I'm not living that kind of life, I need to get back to Hebrews. Right off the bat, let's just get it straight. Who's the object of praise? Christ is the object of praise. Chapter 2, Issachar. Now, this reminds me of game shows to remember his name. It's a car. I won something for the first time in my life. Issachar means there is reward. When I come to God, there is reward. Verse 1-3, chapter 2. This is scary stuff. For this reason, we must pay closer attention. Because he is God, we must pay closer to attention to what we have heard so we don't drift away from it. For if the word spoken through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? After it was first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed to us by those who heard, God testifying with them, both by signs and wonders and various miracles and the gifts of the Holy Spirit according to his own will. What's the reward? It's salvation. So is it exciting to wake up every day knowing that you've got salvation? It needs to be. I mean, look at 14 and 15. Since children share in the flesh and blood, he himself, Christ, likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death. That's the devil. But verse 15, might free those who through the fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. He set us free from the fear of death. If you start looking around today, you just notice people are totally fearful of dying. Oh, COVID, this, it's going to get me. No, there's so much fear in this world, not just from COVID, but for so many other things. We've been set free from that. We have an incredible reward. First John chapter 5, verse 13. What does he say? These things I have written to you who believe in the Son, in the name of the Son of God, so that you can know that you have at this present time eternal life. Whoa. Am I blessed? Do I live like I'm blessed? Something to think about. There is a reward. And then Zebulun. I'll probably get as far as Reuben, probably chapter 4, and then I better quit because I can see my time running out. Zebulun is the wished for habitation. Now, this is really interesting because he's writing to people that are starting to fall away, go back to Judaism, because they're under a persecution and it's going to get worse, right? They're just not able to keep their Christianity going. So he's trying to pump them up. And that's what this book is about. And it's got to be for us because we can have that tendency to get down and out, but you got to get pumped up. So you got to read this book more than once. And if you apply these names, it makes a whole lot of sense. It gives a little bit more depth to the text. I mean, verse 5 of chapter 3, Moses was faithful in his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. He's talking about the tabernacle, that Old Testament. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house, which is what James was talking about today in our morning class, whose house we are. We are the temple of God. Now that takes you back to who? It takes you back to Ernie. Why? Because it's a big if. It's one of the biggest ifs in the Bible. If we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. Our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end? What's that? My Lord and my God. There's our confidence. And there's our hope that we need to hang on to. But the problem here in chapter 3, all those guys in the wilderness, they lost it. Why? Well, because it was a wished for habitation. They were wishing. Verse 18, to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but those who were disobedient, who weren't paying attention, who weren't obeying. So we see that they were not able to enter his rest because of their unbelief. Apistia, where should we get our word faith from? Pistuo. You put an A in front of it, it's a negative. Unbelief. But don't use the word unbelief. Lack of faith. They don't make it into the rest of God. Why? Because they don't have faith. You see, we have this wish for a habitation, but you don't just get it because you wished for it. You get it because you have faith, trust, and you're going to do something about that. I mean, verse 2 of James 14, what use is it? If someone has faith, but he has no works, can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing in need of daily food, Betty Gill needs a card from you, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warm, be filled, yet you don't give them what is necessary for the body, what use is it? Even so, if it has no works, faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. These guys had no faith, and they entered not into God's rest. Now, this is cool, and this kind of came to me, right? Like, as you do books here, books there, things start to come together. The genealogy of Adam says what? Man is appointed mortal, the begotten, who is Christ, the praise of God, Jesus. He that descends, absolutely, a teacher shall be sent to overthrow, giving us rest. the rest that we want to enter into is provided by Christ. And that's in Genesis chapter 5, speaking of the future. And when Jesus actually gets here, what does he say? Coming out of Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Now, this is really interesting because that rest kind of means rest, right? Relax. And then he says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Now, that word rest, they're both just so similar, but there's a slight difference between them. Means a place. There's a place for my soul to go. That's the rest that he's talking about in Hebrews. Jesus came to give us rest. What is that? That's the spiritual kingdom. That's being able to be with God himself. But how do you get there? You got to have faith. You got to believe. You got to trust in God. That's how you get there. And then let's finish it off with chapter 4. Why? Well, because chapter 4 helps us to see that. How do you get the rest that he's talking about? You got to have Reuben. You got to have a vision of the Son. And you got to hang on to that vision of the Son, who's in heaven, sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. Look at verse 1-3 of chapter 4. Therefore, let us fear it, while a promise remains of entering his rest. Any one of you may seem to have come short of it. That's the spiritual kingdom. For indeed, we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard. For we who have believed enter that rest. We enter that spiritual rest. And that's what God has called us to do. But how do you accomplish that? You have to hang on to the vision of the Son, which is verse 14. We have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. There's that vision of Jesus sitting in the throne room. I mean, you want a picture, an absolute picture of that? Jump over to Revelation chapter 5. Here's the throne room. And what does it say? I saw between the throne with the 4 living creatures and the elders, a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He came and took the book out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and a golden bowl of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. You imagine those guys up in heaven? What are they doing? They're doing a deep face plant. And they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take the book, to break its seals, for you were slain and purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth. We're kings on earth when you think about it. That's what he's saying right there. Whoa, do we wait till we get to heaven to have that attitude? Do we wait for Sundays to have that attitude? Because when you lose sight of that attitude, you lose sight of what he's blessed us with here to get us charged. You know, it's Hebrews chapter 12. One of my favorites. Why? Because he says, you've come to Mount Zion, city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, myriads of angels, general assembly, the festal assembly, church of the firstborn, enrolled in heaven, God, judge of all, spirits of the righteous, to Jesus. He's saying, you have come. But we don't see with eyes, physical. We see with faith, spiritual. And every time you pray, that's where you go. Every time we gather together, that's where we go. Into what? The throne room of God. And you've got to capture the vision of Christ on that throne. You've got to approach his throne by yourself to receive mercy. You better have a vision. And that vision, when you capture it, it excites us as Christians. We're the only people in the world who have the ability to enter into the throne room of God. The only people in the world. Your neighbors can't do it. We could teach them. That's a good thought. But Hebrews is trying to get us. Yeah, it's a horrible world. Things are falling apart. Nothing looks good. These Jews, the Romans are about to come in and just totally wipe out all of Jerusalem. They're about to be told, time to flee. Don't even take any. Can you imagine? God's going to say to you today, flee. Nothing in your house can you take with you. Are you ready just to go down the road and just walk? I'm not saying that he's going to call us to do that, but he called the Jews in that period of time to flee, right? But how many people went back into the house and lost their lives? Why? Because I can't live without this. I can't live. There's only one thing you can't live without, and that's your relationship with Christ. Hebrews was written to Jews who were struggling in their faith, reminding them of their calling and their spiritual blessing. And personally, I think we need to have this same reminder. And I think we need to see that Hebrews is the go-to book when you're getting down and out, the go-to book to see, wow, every book of the Bible is a go-to book. But today, this is the go-to book, okay? It's just, it's so brilliantly written, and it's not for people back in that period in time as much as it is for us today, because those guys are already in heaven. Today, we're still struggling in this world. And if we're struggling, we need to get back to who? The object of praise is Christ. Understand there is a reward. We've got it right now. It's called salvation. And we are in that habitation. It's called the spiritual. It's the kingdom. It's the rest that he's called us to be into. And to keep all of that, you got to have that vision of the Son, of Jesus, who is not dead or hanging on a cross, as some churches would have him to be. He's very much alive, and he's very much concerned for you. And he does want you to approach his throne of grace to receive mercy. We gotta just stoke the faith, and that's what we can share. That's what people need to see coming out of us. We just need to truly get excited, because it's exciting times. If you're alive today in this world, it's exciting times. Why? Because you've got Christ living in you. We're going to continue with this, but I hope to see you in 2 weeks. And that's the lesson.